Let's talk about Accra, the capital and largest city of the West African nation of Ghana. The population of Accra is 1.7 million, but that figure is dated back from the year 2010, and it has most definitely increased since, likely above 2 million. We are privileged to be joined by Desmond Appiah, the Chief Sustainability Advisor to the Mayor of Accra. Mr. Appiah is also the immediate past Chief Resilience Officer in Accra under the Rockefeller Foundation 100 Resilient Cities program. He led the development of the city's resilience strategy, and on top of his current title, Mr. Appiah is also Accra's C40 City Advisor working on climate change issues, and is also the city's lead on the Bloomberg Philanthropies Initiative for Global Road Safety. He has earned degrees from Ghana, the UK, and another master's in environmental protection in the United States. As Chief Sustainability Advisor to the Mayor, amongst other things such as being the C40 City Advisor working on climate change issues, what does your job entail?
Well, that's an interesting one. I think my job really started as advising the mayor on more environment related issues, and then we looked at the 100 RC program, which was already the city had an arrangement with 100 RC, but based on my background and where I was coming from, I think mayor thought to be better for me to take a look at it, and then also with Bloomberg Initiative on Road Safety. And then at the time, C40, the city also had an arrangement with C40. But my background is more safety, environment, quality assurance. So as far as I was concerned, it was quite straightforward. It didn't look too confusing. But the key areas that we wanted to emphasize was to be able to show what it means if we want to have a handle on waste. It is not as simple as saying this is a waste issue. There may be issues there which are health. There may be issues which are maybe finance. So my job was, the beginning was more to look at this whole spectrum of issues that the city faces, and then also to see the best ways that we can maximize whatever resources we had at our disposal, with an emphasis on these particular things like waste management, traffic and transportation, environmental pollution issues, climate change, road safety. So there were about 6 areas that we wanted to ensure we did not lose focus on. So in a nutshell, if there was a job description at the beginning, that would be what it was.
Yes, and Accra is very active, and I really respect you guys for taking full advantage of all the opportunities that are out there for cities. Speaking of cities, when I bring up cities and the sustainable development goals in conversation, people say, oh, you're talking about SDG 11, sustainable cities, right? And I say, well, there's 17 SDGs. So my question to you is, why are all 17 SDGs important for cities?
I think most of the time it is one of the misconceptions, in my opinion, to just narrow the SDGs down to just a specific goal. Because I don't think that was the framers' thought, but it was rather the ability to interlink and show that you cannot achieve zero or reduce poverty or end poverty if you are not looking at economic growth, or if you are not looking at inclusivity, or if you are not concerned about injustice, be it maybe climate injustice and all. So I see the SDGs, and I try not to be looking at SDGs as a single or in its individual parts, but more as the collective, because if you don't do that, in my opinion, from a city's perspective, if you don't do that, you may just get bogged down on one particular SDG, pay so much attention to it, to the neglect of the others. And so if you take the city of Accra, the mission of the city is to improve the quality of life of its residents. Now, improving quality of life does not only mean provision of clean water. It does not only mean focusing on just economic growth or just being concerned with poverty alone. But sanitation is a part of it. Clean energy is a part of it. Clean water, equality, access to education, all these are part of it, industrialization and the like. So in my thinking, I would rather look at SDGs as the goals that we use to achieve, for instance, Accra's aim of improving the quality of life of its citizens. Fortunately for us, the mission does not say just citizens, but I think it's city dwellers, everybody who lives in the city. So right there, we have migration concerns being looked at. We have, as long as the person is in the boundaries of the city, it is the city's responsibility to ensure that their quality of life will improve. And that, I think, is the driver that we don't have to lose sight of. Because if we do, and we say, oh, it's only on SDG 11, or it's only looking at SDG 2, what would happen is that we may achieve 2 or 11, but we would have missed out on the advantages that the journey was offering us to be able to take. And that is why we have, in Accra, tried to ensure that the linkages are clear to us. And I think my role as being looking at maybe pollution, looking at road safety, looking at climate, looking at resilience, has helped me and hopefully help the city, because all these things come into the same pot. But it's not an easy journey. I mean, it's not as simple as the way I'm explaining it, you know.
Well, Accra and its city dwellers are very lucky to have you. As I mentioned, you were the Chief Resilience Officer for Accra under the Rockefeller Foundation initiative, which was called 100 Resilient Cities. And I love defining key terms. So for everyone listening, resilience is defined as the ability to recover from something, a shock or a stress, especially in a city. So I have a few questions about this program. One is, even though 100 RC overall is over, Accra published the resilience strategy last year in 2019. So how are you already implementing it, and how are you going to continue that moving forward?
I think the mayor was very interested in the resilience agenda. And it was also because you talked about definitions. In defining resilience, it's important not to just look at it as if you fall down, you can get up. I mean, in simple, ordinary man's language. But in paying specific attention to the stresses. I mean, the shocks, you can always prepare. It's easy. You know, if you have an earthquake, these are the things I have to do. If I have a flood, these are the things we have to do. But the stresses, in our case, was the key thing that we were very, very concerned about, because there are a lot of stresses that is undertone. It's difficult to see it. If you take unemployment, for instance, it's very easy for people to overlook the issue of unemployment because, oh, how many people are unemployed? 5%. Okay. I mean, a city of 2-point-something million people, 5%, we can live with that. But it is not a simple matter of just unemployment. There's civil concerns there. I mean, you could have massive civil unrest if the place that the unemployment is concentrated, for instance, is in a poor neighborhood. You know, there are other things that are also, waste management is affected, sanitation issues, and even obeying the law becomes a challenge. And in areas like that, they are very vulnerable. And unfortunately for us, they may be in the floodplain. So bringing it all together and seeing that working with 100 RC was a tool. They have very good tools for us to, you know, do the assessment. We had good technical support. And so we jumped at it. Like I said earlier, our key was that we want to maximize the resources that we have. And we were all coming from private sector. And in private sector, it's like your budget is this, and you have to achieve so much. So we were not going to shy away from um, what we saw as an opportunity. What we were keen on was to ensure that it's aligned to our vision and not to just do it because it's a great program to be on 100 RC and no. We wanted to be sure that it was specific to our needs and then it will help us to achieve our goal. And I know the 100 RC has ended, but there's a Resilient Cities Network, I think that's the name now. We still engage, the city still engages, and we want to be able to not just have had a strategy, but also to be able to do some implementation. And we were also not waiting for the strategy to be completed because there are some activities or actions which, if we wanted to wait, I think that we would be in a real mess. For instance, one of the key things that the 100 RC process made us become a lot more to the front burner, came to the front, was the issue of informality. Because our city, like most global South cities, has over 80% informal sector. And so having an appreciation of the contribution, having an appreciation of what it really means, and even your messaging when you are targeting informal sector is different from if you are looking at formal sector. So one of our actions was to ensure the inclusion of the informal sector in the decision and governance, and based on ensuring that people have more information. With something like that, we couldn't wait for the strategy to be published. We had to right away get it going. And so we think that the process was good for us. The stakeholder engagements were great. The technical knowledge that they shared was massive. This is a good endorsement for 100 RC work, isn't it? But I mean, we have to be honest about what it meant. And also, our aim was not to develop a document and just put it on the shelf, but we wanted to ensure that it's something that works. And so, even as the process was going on, we were dealing with some of the issues that were coming up. And I'm glad to say some of it has carried into our other projects, and we are still working on it. For instance, the work I'm doing for C40 and the city on climate, the Paris Agreement compliant climate action plan, which will be launching soon. We just finished it. There are actions in there which are complementary to the work that we did in the resilience strategy. And some of it also just makes it a lot more focused. Two key points that I will just use as examples. In the resilience strategy, energy was not a big standout issue, but in climate change, energy is a big standout issue, So I think that this climate action plan in areas also gives a bit more meaning to the resilience strategy. And then our work in the resilience strategy with the informal sector was something that we built on for our work in the CAP, the Climate Action Plan. And the city even won an award, the Bloomberg Award, for the work that we've been doing with the informal waste collectors. And so I think all in all, as I mentioned earlier, if we are clear about the goal and conscious of the tools that are available to us, it makes it a lot easier and maybe a bit more efficient for the kind of stuff that we have to do.
Amazing. It sounds like a great initiative, and I've read the resilience strategy is wonderful. So I look forward to the CAP, the Climate Action Plan, as well. I noticed in talking about sustainable development goals, I noticed that Accra has also committed to another initiative, which is completing a voluntary local review. I don't know if you're working on that now, but has not published one yet. So could you talk about that, if that's underway, and how do you balance all the different initiatives?
I think that We have published it. We have finished the voluntary review. We signed up in September 2019. Mayor is one of the things that Mayor engaged with the Minister of Finance's special advisor, Hildy. She was very instrumental in getting the city to have the to understand a bit more about what the SDGs also mean in the city's context. And I think that we're also able to situate it within our reporting framework. So the city works, through what we call the medium-term development plan. So if you take the resilience strategy actions, they have to find their way into the medium-term development plan because that is the statutory obligation. And the city's budget and everything is tuned into the medium-term development plan. So, and it also helps us to institutionalize the action. The actions that are going to come out of the climate action plan, for instance, will also end up based on the time frame that we're giving for each action in the medium-term development plan, either as an appendix or when there's a review, we add the actions to it, so that it falls in the structure of the city to deliver on its mandate. So this voluntary report was also in our situation a tool to help us to see if we are meeting the goals of the SDG. So fortunately, we were able to see, based on the framework and how the city's structure is designed, we have 16 departments. And so it's easier to see that social welfare is looking at these aspects of, and then we just kind of rearranged and reevaluated our reporting regime to see the gaps that we existed, and we worked on it. So our report came out in February. The final one, the draft was in February, the final one was in May. But we had a consultant also from, I think, ADB also to work with us on that. So it's, as I said, all these also goes towards the Agenda 2063, with the immediate part being the Agenda 2030 that we have to be focused on. So we are trying as much as possible not to lose sight of all these various agendas. It's just that it is supposed to help the city to meet its goal of improving the quality of life of its residents and city dwellers.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for bringing up the Agenda 2063, because that's very unique for the continent, that you have this Agenda 2030 that's driving you for nearer term action, but the bigger picture is 2063. So that's really amazing. My next question is, what kind of dialogues or knowledge sharing opportunities already exist on the continent of Africa for cities to engage in the sustainable development goals? And feel free to suggest new ones as well.
Well, I think the Africa Union, worked on the Agenda 2063. There's a Economic Commission for Africa, ECA. We use so many acronyms sometimes we just stick with the acronyms, So the ECA, there's a interministerial, intergovernmental, and then there's also the bloc, like East Africa, West Africa, ECOWAS, and so there are these blocks. And then there are also these other international organs that have presence in a lot of cities. For instance, we talked about 100RC. C40 is also very active in, I think, 11 cities in Africa. And we do have a lot of knowledge sharing, expertise, best practice sharing, and all that. We have specific calls. The city advisor in Accra, I have counterparts in Lagos who may be dealing with situations similar to ours. So we share knowledge. And then in Cape Town and Durban, Dakar. Then there's also other initiatives. I mentioned the Bloomberg Initiative on Road Safety. They have a presence in 2 cities in Ghana now. Accra used to be just Accra, but now Kumasi has been added to it. And then they are in Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. And we do have kind of conferences where we meet and discuss some of these things. Sometimes we even meet outside of the continent and then get expertise from other areas. But we've been pushing for more intra-continental engagement. And my reason is one of my suggestions. My reason is because the global South cities have peculiar challenges, and also the characteristics are very similar. I mean, if over 50% or so of the world's population is going to balloon in the global South, I think it's very important that we become a lot more conscious of those challenges and how they are being dealt with amongst the cities and amongst the countries. And then, so that's besides the one side where there's a lot of engagement. The other part is that there should be a lot more action programs. We are working with political figures. We are developing action plans. We are developing strategies, but we need to be implementing. So I am a big pusher for pilot programs. So the city of Accra has an arrangement with the city. And in our initial conversations, because we're all C40 cities, in the initial conversations, I think our concern was on waste management and how we can gain some technical knowledge for our waste management department. But we also were able to have an arrangement where we undertake a pilot project to show that these initiatives we are talking about can work. That, for me, is the big gap that we are not filling. And most of the international programs and our development partners are pushing for the development of strategies, but we need to push besides the development of the strategies to test it. I mean, if we test it on a very small scale and it works, we can replicate. But developing the strategies and the plans without that complementary indication that it can work, I think it's a big area we have to pay attention to. And the reason why I'm really emphasizing that is that there is the issue of trust. Most populations in global South cities have trust issues with political systems, because when it comes to elections, there are a lot of promises, and then they do not see the corresponding implementation of those actions. So we come now to you and we say, look, there's air pollution because the way you are managing your waste is poor. You're burning, it's illegal dumping, but there's a better way to do it. They may look at you and say, look, you are also from the authority. So, I mean, what difference are you going to show? But if we're able to demonstrate that this alternative way that we are talking about can work, and in this case, the challenges we are facing are global challenges, they are not just the localized issues, then we demonstrate that it can work with a small mini pilot project, as we've been trying to do here in Accra. We introduced waste segregation at a sub-metro, like a very local area, all the schools. Then we opened it up a bit more. The issue is that when these things are done, we should also, my third point, we should also be able to do evaluation through proper monitoring. And then if the feedback is positive, the lessons are learned, then we can scale up. But we don't, and it's because most of the time the competing needs are too many. So some of these initiatives that in the long run, all of us know in sustainability thinking will lead us to a proper goal. People think that they are too long term. Let's look at the short term issues, score some points and go away. So I think being able to push for and undertake those initiatives would help us to move to the next level. Then my last on this would be, we should also undertake programs that can work in multiple cities. I mean, if we are doing waste segregation here, we don't have to go and start from zero in, say, Lagos, because the characteristics of Accra and Lagos are very similar. the one key thing that will be different will be the population concentration, because Lagos has a lot of people. So we test it here on a smaller scale, it's less complicated, there's a need for learnings and all that. Then when we transition, we are not starting from zero. So we should be undertaking this kind of programs. If it's energy, maybe Lagos is a better place to start because you can test it better in Lagos. But when you come to Accra, it may be a lot easier to roll out. So I think we should look at these challenges as common issues and then address them as such, and then promote use of local experts too. I think sometimes that is the big gap that I see in a lot of programs that I've worked on.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear there is a lot of dialogue and knowledge sharing already. And it seems from your answer that a lot of it is connected to specific initiatives. So I'm wondering if I may quickly follow up to hammer back to SDGs. Are there any specific networks? You know, it may come up when you're talking to other 100 RC cities, but are there any specific conversations around the Sustainable Development Goals or any networks specific to that?
There are specific actions within some of the networks. For instance, the Resilient Cities Network now, as they like to remind me so that we call them that, is working on waste management initiatives. And we've been having conversations with other cities in the network here in Africa to see what common ground there is, how the project can be designed to maybe roll out in all the cities, or how maybe, as I mentioned earlier, a pilot is undertaken, say, in Accra, and then, or what Accra has been able to achieve through the informal sector integration in waste management, and the lessons that can be passed on to the other cities. So there is that kind of network. And I'm aware that the Global Covenant of Mayors, GCOM, also is working on a few other initiatives. And then C40 also has a couple of initiatives in water, in flooding, which are looking at the more common challenges or issues that are coming up from the member cities. And then, so that gives a common platform, and whatever is developed can be replicated. So there are pockets of actions. And I'm glad to add that it's interesting that that is the direction we're going now, because previously there were too many isolated ways of looking at some of these challenges. And I think it meant that there's a lot of resources expended without a corresponding impact. So this is good.
Yeah, it sounds really great, and that cities across the continent want to engage. And I also just generally have a comment. I was chuckling before because I agree about, especially elected officials. They're focused on getting reelected, right? So it's difficult to get them to think long term. But anyway, moving on. I want to step back for a moment and gain a broader view. You mentioned this a bit, population growth, but the population of Africa is expected to reach 2.5 billion by the year 2050, which is a doubling from now. So a doubling of the entire population in just 30 years. How is Accra preparing for this exponential population growth?
Well, here in Accra, we are currently about 2.4 million. We're going to have a census this year, and so we should have more firm numbers. But it is projected that our population will be 6 million in the same period or so. That's 3 times. Now, if you have housing challenges, if you have energy challenges, if you have issues with poverty, with 2-point-something million, I mean, you can do the extrapolation and see what it would mean in when you have 6 million. So part of what Accra is doing is some of this planning that we are undertaking, which put things in perspective for us. If we have, for instance, a target to reduce our waste going to landfill by 50%, for instance, we've been able to undertake the first step with support from C40 to do waste characterization, which gives us that we have organic waste about 56%. We have plastics maybe 14 or so percent. That straight up gives us a sense of the kind of initiatives we can be pushing going forward. Now, if those initiatives work well, your population will be increasing, but it's the numbers, it's how you are managing the numbers. Other than that, we are producing about 3,000, a little about 3,000 tons of waste a day. Now, if we don't get the management into perspective, then when we are 6 million, it's going to be really out of hand. So I think what is most important for us is to have that forward-thinking mentality and to understand all these issues of circular economy and sustainability, because it's not going to go away. I mean, if for anything, it's even going to become more prominent in the things that we are dealing with. And so the earlier we are able to push on stakeholder engagement for people to understand the issues, holding government and our citizens accountable and responsible, ensuring that we know the challenges, the stresses, as we talked about earlier, and tackling those stresses, I think we should be fine. But having said that, that also calls for the corresponding budgets to address some of these things, because infrastructure issues, which are part of the Sdgs anyway, are things that we have to be able to ensure that we address. How do we plan? In our climate action plan, for instance, we are talking about spatial planning and how the city is planned. Because Accra, according to the Marion Institute, Accra has sprawled, massively because of housing costs. So can we afford to just continue to open up laterally? So because when you have 6 million people instead of 2 million, you cannot keep expanding just like that. You need to redesign or refocus on how you design your cities to take care of all these things. So I think now that all these are in the public domain and is part of the discussion points that are going on, it offers us great opportunity not to stop, but to build on it and let people understand that this is the future that we are moving into. So very soon it will not be a choice that I want to just drive a bus with a fleet of diesel vehicles, but that there are alternatives and that people have the capacity and the understanding to do that. So I think in a way, that is how Accra is looking at it and being practical about the challenges we face. I think one of the things also you mentioned, Accra has become like a model. It's because the mayor from the get-go has made it clear that there's no point in trying to hide what the challenges are. Let's embrace what challenges we have and then deal with it. And Mayor Soa has been a great leader in driving this agenda for us.
I'm glad that you guys are forward thinking. And I want to stay on this theme of population and a particular part of the population. UN data shows that today about 75% of Africa's population is under the age of 35. That's quite a high percentage. So with this large youth population, what challenges but also opportunities does that present for sustainable cities?
I think when it comes to opportunities, I will start with the opportunities. But for opportunities, it can help to build proper partnerships and also push innovation and based on how we tackle it. But if we are not conscious of the numbers and the trends, then our decision making will not be preparing us to deal with the potential fallout if we don't act. But it offers great opportunity, especially Accra has a high in-migration population from the whole of West Africa. And this has become like a destination of choice. So we have to be conscious. How do you plan and act to ensure that education is not just to a certain section of the populace, you know? And it's part of the reason why the government flagship program of free education, free secondary education, has been a big success for us, because we think that it's preparing us for the nature of the growth that we are going to see. And you see from the central government initiatives, there's also what they are calling one district, one factory. And that if we are having this free education now, free secondary education, to give us the skills and the kind of educational wherewithal for, I mean, an educated population is easier to train in other things. Now, if you have more factories, more jobs, more, and you don't have the kind of labor force that you need, then you know you're heading for trouble. So, as I've said to you earlier, I think more in linkages. So I try to see how all these factor into what it means for us, that we shouldn't lose sight of. That if you're having a huge youthful population, you have to be able to find a way to manage it properly so that it doesn't become a challenge down the line, either in terms of not having enough people or the people the right requisite qualifications. Even food security can become a challenge if you overlook it. So when we are talking about maybe pushing a front on compact city development and then being more energy efficient, being efficient in transportation, all these things have a bearing, because if you don't begin to think like that and plan like that, when your numbers shoot up, it becomes something that food is going to come from further afield, and that has its own implications. So I think the census this year is a huge item for the country, because it will help us to be able to put things in perspective properly. Because right now, even the numbers I was giving you are based on works by other agencies and estimations based on the last census and all that. Now, that's why the waste characterization we did was good for us, because that gave us the specific. It is not, now when we are quoting, we are not saying it because it feels like it, but this is what it is. You know, this is the calorific value of your waste. So if you want to push for waste to energy, this is what you have. It's not just fanciful to come and talk about waste to energy, you know. And interestingly, this is just on the buy, yeah. But you know, because of the initially a couple of years ago, the talk on waste management as an issue, a lot of companies were coming in. They want to do waste to energy, and we sit with them and say, look, the character of our waste can be a challenge, but when an investor is pushing so hard, and they may feel that you are trying to stop them. But we were trying to be factual, to say, unless we undertake an exercise to understand the nature of our waste, maybe the solution may not even be waste to energy, you know, but we have to be sure about it. And that is the direction that the mayor wanted us to go, to be as factual as possible, to engage as much as possible, to be conscious of the limitations of the technology and the technocrats, and be conscious also of the need for capacity building. And once those things are being done, it gives us confidence that even if the numbers are going up, we may be in good hands. But I mean, we don't want to get out of our zone. So I think that the numbers are key. We have to keep an eye on it. We have to engage, and also we have to be realistic about the nature of the engagement.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up engagement, because I actually want to ask about how Accra is engaging young leaders specifically in sustainability, and this doesn't necessarily include just people who are working at City Hall, but the larger youth community in Accra. How are you already meaningfully engaging them, and how do you hope to engage them further or in new ways in the coming years?
Thank you for all the actions that we've undertaken. For instance, in the resilience strategy, stakeholder mapping is a key part of it. After we've done the mapping, we go out. Sometimes we have to even get other civil society organizations to leave the city to go into communities because we are conscious that they have strength in that area. And so, Slum Dwellers International, they have a local version or a local chapter. They have been one of the partners that we did a lot of work with in terms of engagement in communities. Remember, for resilience strategy, we wanted to understand the community, so we worked with them a lot. We also work with the associations for informal, they have informal groups, and also they are identifiable migrant communities. And so there's a department in the assembly called social welfare, and that social welfare and community development. That is their forte, to know the vulnerable communities, to know all those things, and they've been very active. I think one of the things that this mayor's administration brought in, I came with a mayor, brought in was the recognition of inclusion from the very beginning. So, and I'm not saying previously there was no inclusion, but I think that the emphasis we have placed on it has been a lot more. There was a time that the mayor would visit one market each week in the city in the beginning, just to engage the market women. And so Mayor Sowa has been very particular about that, hearing the views. And then also in the climate action plan, because the climate action plan is a lot more technical than the resilience strategy, which was more just soliciting information, So the stakeholder mapping, the climate action plan actually required of us as part of the C40 process to develop a stakeholder engagement plan. And one of those things was the stakeholder mapping and being clear from the get-go that these are the stakeholders you need to be engaging. If you wait too long before you make them understand the whole process, you lose out. And so we have been clear from the very beginning that these stakeholders are a part of the process. And even the way we formed the steering committee involved a lot of outside agencies to be part. And then when we have identified specific challenges, like in waste management, the waste management department has been encouraged to form, I think it's called environment clubs or so, in some select senior high schools. And so they're engaging the youth because we want to promote recycling. And we know that if the youth get on board, it's much better. And there are also a lot of people who walk in, agencies, civil society organizations, non-governmental organizations. They walk in with questions and ideas, and we try as much as possible to engage and to find out what would work, what may not work. Sometimes I think we're a little bit too blunt for some, but we see that that's the way to go. And it's been helpful. But I think the stakeholder engagement, not only, all I'm describing to you has been on going to the bottom, but on the other side of the governmental agencies, vertical integration has also been a key part of our concern. In fact, right now, as part of the climate action plan, we've developed a vertical integration strategy. But we've been fortunate enough that throughout the process, we have been working with, say, the EPA, the Energy Commission, the Ministry of Environment, the National Development Planning Commission. All these have something to do with activities that impact on climate. And because the mapping was quite good, and then we did what we call a strategic appraisal, which looked at the powers of the city against the other things that other agencies have the power to deal with. And all those things have really helped us to ensure that we are trying to take everybody along. And there have been other programs that have come up that we've been active in, maybe EPA and WHO and Ghana Health Service, and I took a project on urban health initiative, and the city was very active in it. I was on that program along with some colleagues of mine, and we really talked about air pollution and its impact, and WHO, with the support of CCAC, We did some community engagement, dramatize it, and so we've really tried to go the full haul, using all the tools available to bring these issues up. I think we've also been fortunate that the development partners we are working with seem to be understanding of the things that we are pushing, because sometimes their budget line suggests something, and we need to maybe change it, not figure in the budget, but to be able to change that particular item to something else that has a much greater impact. I could give you one quick example. On the WHO CCAC program, as part of the program design, in a specific area where waste burning was happening a lot, and that program was looking at the short-lived climate pollutants, and they wanted to pay for the services of a waste collector, say just a month, so that we can see the impact on the air quality, so that a formal collector will come for it, and so we check it. But we saw that when the program ends, it will become a challenge for us. So it's better we change that approach. And of course, in the discussion, they saw what we were talking about, and we changed it. And I think it worked better for all of us. So we're trying to use all the tools. We are not leaving anything. We are using the tools. And when we have to call on people and knock on doors and send emails, we do. And we are very fortunate that all our development partners and our colleagues have been very receptive to our hard line pro sustainability stance. That has been very positive for everybody. And I think they are seeing the results, so they are also excited.
I'm so glad to hear that you're using all of your resources. And just as a comment, as a young person myself, I know a lot of Ghanaian youth who are so energetic, so competent. So I hope that you continue to engage them in your work. I want to move on. I saw that I think it's an annual event, the Sdgs Investment Fair in Accra. The last one happened in November 2019. And it looks like it was spearheaded by the Ministry of Finance, which you mentioned as a partner earlier. But how was the city involved, and what did you find were the key takeaways, specifically as it pertains to finance and the SDGs?
The city was involved, but not at the core of the program. The Ministry of Finance has a team on SDG. They work with us, as I mentioned, on the voluntary reporting, and also we contributed to even designing of part of the reporting, how now all the assemblies across Ghana would be reporting and aligning their reporting line to the SDG. And we think that that's a great achievement. And so we're glad to be part of that. But what we've been pushing have been what we are calling the locally determined contributions, and for that conference, as I mentioned, we were part of it, but not at the core. And so that's the direction. I remember Mayor spoke about locally determined contributions and what it would mean, because if the plans are made at a national level and we do not have the local actions to meet them, that will become. But as part of our forward march in SDG, climate change and resilience and all, our next step is more of implementation. And so we have no option, but we're going to have to work with not just our development partners, but with the Ministry of Finance's sustainability unit, and also with the Ministry of Environment, Science and Technology, and the Ministry of Local Government, which is the mother ministry of the assemblies, to be able to move to the next level. Because we've recognized it's not just enough that the actions end up in the medium-term development plan, which is the primary tool for financing. It's the actions in there that are financed, because they can be tracked. There's a tracking mechanism and all that. But there are other initiatives which may not be part of the medium-term development plan, but are necessary for us to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, achieve our SDG goals, and also build our resilience. So that may call for different ways of financing. And we are looking at all. As engagement with private sector is all part of the things that we are going to be doing. We do it, but we just step in it up.
Definitely. And I've arrived to my last question, at least for now. So we're in the year 2020. It means we've entered the decade of action. And that means there's only 10 years left to achieve Agenda 2030. It's no secret the world is behind where it needs to be. It's not on track to achieve the goals with business as usual. So how can cities specifically step up to accelerate achievement? And what do you think some of the obstacles will be specifically for cities to contribute?
I think two quickies. The first is that it is clear now that the actions to really achieve goals and ambitions and all that are targeted or should be targeted at cities or should be driven by cities. That does not mean that the national government do not have a role, but the cities, the municipalities are the places where the tire hits the ground. And I think that even globally, you can see that there's a shift towards more city engagement because the mayors are taking the initiatives and taking the actions which are necessary. And so sometimes we get some bad information and that becomes the catalyst because I think that was driven by the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement by President Trump. So that has made people realize that, look, we better get the cities to be acting because at the end of the day, these actions are going to be taken on the ground in those areas. The second is that we are also seeing that there's also financing mechanisms being shifted to focus also on cities, which is a very good thing because Accra can develop all the plans that we want. We can develop all the actions we know can take us to zero emissions. But if we cannot find the financing or are not in a position to be financed or supported to implement those actions, there will be nothing going on. So in the climate action plan, for instance, what we've done with the timelines is that we've put very tough initiatives to be undertaken by 2030. And in the modeling, there are actions for between 2030 to 2040 and 2040 to 2050. And we think by which time, if we're able to undertake based on technology availability and all that, we should be carbon neutral. But the most crucial part of this action plan is the next 10 years. If we are not able to action these activities that we've outlined in the next 10 years, it will be very difficult to get to carbon neutrality by 2050. So this is a very crucial phase around the world for a lot of the sustainability goals and climate related. But we also have confidence that we've seen what we can achieve with targeted resources and targeted, clearly thought through and well planned activities. And there's a lot of goodwill out there, I think, a lot of goodwill, both at the local level and the international level, that we should take advantage of and not lose sight of the necessary monitoring and assessment and all that, but ensure that we target actions that can give us the results that we're looking for.
Oh my gosh, it was so amazing talking to you. I'm looking at the clock and it's been an hour. It felt much shorter because I was just on every word that you said. Thank you again so much for your time. I know this will inspire other young people in other cities to engage further in the SDGs.